Right now, the word recession is everywhere. It is in the news. It is in the group chat. It is being said by economists, politicians, your uncle at dinner, and the guy on YouTube who has been predicting one every year since 2014. And somewhere mixed in with all of that noise, you will also hear the word depression, usually when someone wants to sound extra alarming. But here is a question almost nobody can answer correctly when you ask them directly. What is the actual difference between a recession and a depression? Most people say something like, a recession is bad and a depression is really bad. And while that is technically in the right direction, it is not an answer. It is a feeling. So today we are going to fix that. In plain language, no economics degree required, and we are going to connect it directly to what is happening in the US economy right now, because as of this week, recession probability models at some of the most respected institutions in the world are running at between 30 and 50%. Understanding what those words actually mean is not a trivial question. It is practical. Let us start with recession. A recession has a very specific, measurable definition. In its simplest form, a recession is when the economy shrinks for 2 consecutive quarters. A quarter is 3 months. 2 quarters is 6 months. So a recession means the economy has been getting smaller, producing less, earning less, employing fewer people for at least 6 months in a row. Economists measure this using something called GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product. Think of GDP as the total value of everything a country produces. Every product made, every service provided, every meal served, every car sold, added up into one giant number. When that number is growing, the economy is expanding. When it shrinks, the economy is contracting. 2 consecutive quarters of shrinking GDP is the standard definition of a recession. In human terms, here is what a recession actually feels like. Companies slow down hiring. Some start laying workers off. People who still have jobs feel less secure and start spending less money. Consumer spending drops. Revenue at businesses falls. More companies cut more jobs. Credit gets harder to get. And the whole cycle feeds on itself for a while before eventually reversing. Most recessions in American history lasted between 8 and 18 months. The average recession since World War II lasted about 10 months. They are painful. They cost real people real jobs and real income, but they end. And when they end, the economy usually picks up again. Since 1945, the US has had 12 recessions. It recovered from all 12. Now here is the important part. The US economy right now is not technically in a recession. The most recent data shows GDP grew by 2.0% in Q1 2026. That is expansion, not contraction. Unemployment sits at 4.3%, which is historically still fairly low. So officially, right now, today, no recession. But here is why everyone is nervous anyway. Several of the most reliable early warning signals for a recession are flashing at the same time. The Conference Board's leading economic index, a tool that historically predicts turning points in the economy about 7 months in advance, just dropped 0.6% in March 2026. Erasing its February gain. Consumer confidence just hit 53.3 on the University of Michigan's index, a level that has historically appeared either inside a recession or right before one begins. It was above 70 just a few months ago. Manufacturing activity has been contracting, and Moody's AI recession model just hit 49%, one tick from the 50% threshold that has preceded every U.S. recession in the past 80 years. What all of this means is, we are not in a recession yet, but the ingredients are assembling, and the recipe looks familiar. Now let us talk about depression, because this is where most people get confused. A depression is not just a worse recession, it is a completely different animal. Here is the simplest way to think about the difference. A recession is when you get sick. Depression is when you nearly die. Economists do not have one single agreed-upon technical definition of a depression the way they do for a recession. But the general working rule is this. A depression is an economic contraction that is both very deep and very long. The most common benchmark used is a GDP decline of 10% or more. By comparison, the worst recession in recent memory, the Great Recession of 2008 to 2009, saw GDP fall by about 4.3% at its worst. Depression is more than twice that severe. The only true depression in modern American history is the Great Depression, which began with the stock market crash in 1929 and lasted through most of the 1930s. During the Great Depression, GDP fell by 30%, not 4%, not 10%, 30%. Unemployment reached 25%, meaning 1 in 4 Americans who wanted a job could not find one. Banks failed by the thousands. More than 9,000 banks collapsed during the Depression, wiping out the savings of ordinary families who had done nothing wrong. Bread lines stretched around city blocks. Families lost their homes, their farms, their savings, and their sense of future. And the Depression lasted over a decade. From 1929 to roughly 1941, the American economy never fully recovered, but it took a world war and the enormous government spending that came with it to finally pull the country out. So here is the key difference between a recession and a depression, summed up in the simplest possible way. A recession is a temporary pullback. The economy shrinks, it hurts, and then it heals. Most people get through it without permanently losing everything. A depression is a collapse. GDP falls so far and unemployment rises so high that entire systems break. Banks, businesses, and the assumptions people built their financial lives on. Recovery takes not months but years or decades. And the permanent damage, people who never regain their former earning power, savings wiped out that never come back, businesses that close and never reopen, is far deeper than anything a typical recession produces. The practical difference for a regular person is this. In a recession, you might lose your job and need to find a new one within 6 to 12 months. In a depression, you might spend years unable to find work at all, regardless of how hard you try, because the demand for labor across the whole economy has collapsed. Now let us be very direct about where we are right now. What most economists are worried about in 2026 is a recession, not a depression. The specific concern is a combination of slowing consumer spending, sticky inflation, high oil prices from the Middle East conflict, and tariff-driven economic drag, all pressing on an economy that is still technically growing but clearly slowing. Polymarket, the world's largest prediction market, currently puts the chances of a U.S. recession in 2026 at about 29%, down from 37% when oil was above $100 a barrel. Moody's AI recession model sits at 49%, one tick from the 50% threshold that preceded every U.S. recession in 80 years, while Goldman Sachs puts odds at 30% and EY Parthenon at 40%. Those are meaningful probabilities, not certainties, not guarantees, but not nothing either. The word depression is not in any serious economist's current vocabulary for 2026. The U.S. banking system is not collapsing. Unemployment has not surged. GDP has not fallen 30%. What is being debated is whether the slowdown we are already feeling becomes a technical recession, 2 quarters of negative GDP, or whether the economy manages to slow down without tipping over. The honest answer right now is that nobody knows for certain, and anyone who tells you they do is guessing. Here is the practical takeaway for you personally. Whether or not a recession officially arrives in 2026, the conditions that precede recessions, slower hiring, tighter credit, cautious consumer spending, volatile markets, are already present, and the people who get through recessions best are almost always the ones who prepared before the official declaration arrived, not after. Because by the time NBER officially announces a recession, you are already 6 to 12 months into it. The playbook is not complicated. It is the same in every cycle. Reduce high-interest debt before rates rise further. Build up your emergency fund before job markets soften. Avoid making large leveraged bets in the stock market, in real estate, in your business, during periods of elevated uncertainty. These are not exciting moves. They will not go viral, but they are what the people who came through 2001, 2008, and 2020 financially intact actually did. Not because they predicted the crash, but because they prepared for the possibility. So here is the question I want you to answer in the comments. Do you think the U.S. tips into a technical recession in 2026? Or do you think the economy holds together and avoids it? And more importantly, are you preparing as if it might? Because the difference between a recession and a depression might be interesting trivia. But the difference between being prepared and being caught off guard is not trivia at all.